matter how old we are, we never outgrow the need to ask questions. The truth is, we just don't know all the answers. Most of us go to Google with our questions. Just think about the things that you've Googled. Questions like, why can't you put the dog in the washing machine? To wondering how old certain celebrities are, how to spell certain words, and how to learn the hottest TikTok dance. But here's the thing, we can't Google search every answer we're looking for. I take that back. We can, it just may not always be a clear answer. To start off, we're gonna ask somewhat of a churchy question. Maybe you've wondered this before, or maybe you haven't, and it's totally fine either way. But the question is, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Some people would say that our answer to this question changes everything about our lives. If that's true, then yes, this is a big question. However, if you've watched 5 different TikToks or 5 different YouTube videos, you'd get 5 different answers for what this means. And when there are multiple possible answers to a question, it can be confusing. See, people have been asking what it means to follow Jesus for a really long time. People are asking it now, and people are asking it thousands of years ago when Jesus showed up. In the Gospels, which is the part of the Bible that tells us about Jesus' life, we're given an insider look of what following Jesus is all about. Check this out. See, back in that time period, religious leaders, not just Jesus, had disciples. Disciples were people who followed teachers or leaders around to learn from them. Surely Peter and Andrew wondered what made Jesus different from the other teachers, and probably wondered things like, where would following this teacher take them? And how long would they be gone? Jesus answers by basically saying, follow me and watch the way I live my life, watch how I do things, and then go and do the same. And when you do that, you know what will happen. Instead of being people who pull fish out of the water, you'll spend your time inviting humans to know God better and be who God has made them to be. I'll bring you out a new way of living to be in the world. What Jesus offered was enough to inspire Peter and Andrew to go with him. They left their fishing nets, their careers, their identities, and their community and followed Jesus. And a bunch of other women and men joined them, and they went as well. What I want you to really notice is that Jesus didn't have them first pass a Bible test. He didn't ask them if they were religious. He didn't ask around to find out how good their behavior was. He didn't tell them that they were going to be better than other people. No, none of this happened. Jesus simply invited them to follow in his footsteps and do as Jesus did, talk as Jesus talked, and love as Jesus loved. Jesus invited them to go where he went so that they could possibly be more like him. And the thing is that when they left their nets, their families, and their way of doing life, they were probably filled with a ton of questions like, where are we going? How's all this gonna turn out? For those of us who are familiar with the life of Jesus, it can be easy to forget that when Jesus started out, no one knew how the story was gonna end. No one could have anticipated how it would all go down. As far as they knew, Jesus was just another interesting religious leader. Fast forward 3 years throughout their time together, these disciples would see Jesus walk on water, heal the sick, and raise people from the dead. They would hear him speak and watch him forgive people's sins. They would see him arrested and sentenced to death without even putting up a fight. And finally, after 3 days of being dead and buried, they'd see him come to life again. The things that they could have never imagined. What's also crazy is what following Jesus meant to the disciples after he was gone. Peter eventually becomes the first leader of the church. Except for John, every one of Jesus' closest disciples died defending their love and faith in Jesus and what he represented. Thousands of years later, we're still looking at their stories and learning from them, and even naming children after them. When Jesus asked them to follow, they had no idea what they would do and who they would become. But God knew. God had a life in mind for them that was bigger than the life that they were currently living. Jesus had more in mind for who they'd become and more in mind for the relationships that they would have. And he had more in mind for how much they would matter in this world. Their biggest life questions found bigger answers and better than they would have ever dreamed of dreaming their answers to be. You could say it this way: Jesus had more in mind for their lives in areas that mattered most. And in the same way, Jesus has more in mind for our lives and areas of our lives that matter most. If we asked Andrew and Peter and other disciples, what does it mean to follow Jesus? At the beginning, they wouldn't have known, but they knew enough to take a step at the time. and they knew they didn't have to have everything figured out on day one. They just had to commit one day at a time, one step at a time, following Jesus and his example. As a result, they found more purpose and direction. They found better relationships. They had more joy and peace. They found something worth giving their lives to. They found answers to what they were looking for, and we can too. Think of it this way. When you really understand who Jesus is, it changes everything. Following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions, because if Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most, then following him will lead to clarity in those areas. For the disciples, following Jesus was an adventure that changed who they were and who they became. Jesus changed their lives in the best possible way. Sure, he taught them so many things about life and even their behavior, but more than that, Jesus loved them and served them. To tell them following Jesus wasn't about religion and a bunch of rules, it wasn't about social media, atheistic, or about following secondhand information from other people who claim to know Jesus. To them, it was a personal experience, a life-changing encounter with Jesus himself. It was a journey that led them from richer, deeper, more full human lives than they could have ever imagined. But what about us? We can't be physically present with Jesus like they were. So what can we do? Whether you're already following Jesus or you're just thinking about it, here's a few things I think we can do to get started. First, start reimagining what following Jesus looks like. Consider asking yourself a few things. Has my view of following Jesus become too small? Have I reduced it to a bunch of rules or lists or do's and don'ts? If it's bigger than that, if it's an adventure, if it's life-changing, what if it's a friendship that I've always wanted? Reimagine it, write it down, draw it out, visualize a new way. Then take a step. Follow the example of Andrew and Peter. They simply took a step to follow Jesus. They left their nets. They didn't know what would happen with their lives. They just trusted Jesus enough to take one step. So what would a step look like for you? Don't overwhelm yourself with all these steps. Take 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. Start with just one single thing, one single step. Maybe you start by doing something honest with God, asking questions. Maybe it would be having a deep conversation in your small group or at the landing. Maybe it's showing up here consistently or engaging with your small group at the landing more frequently. Maybe it would cost you something. Maybe it would be worth it. Identify your next step and then be bold enough to take it. And last, think about these 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? Can I make a difference? Over the next few weeks, we're gonna go looking at and dig into those questions. Following Jesus can help us as we learn to answer these questions. Jesus isn't just a separate category in our lives. He's a part of figuring this stuff out. Invite Jesus into this process. You may be surprised by what you discover, so spend some time thinking about those questions. Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. Imagine if we could really understand this fully. What if we could see that following Jesus is life-changing? What if we quit seeing it as a list of religious rules and started seeing it as something bigger than that? And what if we trusted that following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions? We have no idea where this journey will take us, but neither did Andrew and Peter, and it took them beyond what they could ever imagine.